All right, Friday, 10:53 on the West Coast, 1:53 on the East Coast. Welcome to the Croup Show, brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out in Corte Madera and Emeryville. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig and a Pickle. Go check them out. Marin Auto Glass, also one of our sponsors. MarinAutoGlass.com, 415-883-3030. Underdog Fantasy. Check the link in the description. Use that promo code Krug, and they'll match you up to your first $100. And we can't forget our good friends at Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles down in Monterey. Call Anthony Catania, 831-521-5264. We're going to talk a little Niners this hour. Chase Sr. in the house, as he always is on Friday. One of my favorite streams of the week. Chase, what's going on, man? How are you?
It's a beautiful Friday. I'm doing great. Appreciate everybody for hanging out here with us. We've been doing this show for a little while on this Friday spot, and we started in the regular season. We got to oversee that magical run to the Super Bowl. Catastrophic loss. Free agency was really hyped up. Now for the draft, though, San Francisco is sitting at number 31, and I do like draft time because you have an opportunity to scout a lot of these prospects. But in this kind of 2-week window before some of the draft talk heats up, it's been a little bit slower on the Niner front, which is very, very rare because there's always storylines and there's always something to talk about around this football team. But right now, it's a little bit slow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm putting together a video on NFL draft sleepers. And, you know, you think about it and you're like, well, what is a sleeper? Now, people will be like, well, this guy or that guy. And a lot of times it'll be like somebody who's going to, watched a thing last night with Mel Kiper and Field Yates on ESPN, and it was entitled Draft Sleepers. And they had guys that Mel was like, yeah, you might, you'll watch him he'll probably go middle of day 2. Well, dude, if you're going to go in the middle of day 2, you're not a sleeper. You're not a sleeper prospect if you're going to be drafted in the second round, right? I mean, isn't that kind of a guarantee? I don't know.
I think a sleeper has to be categorized as 4th round or later because that's a day 3 selection that people are literally sleeping on because they don't get drafted until day 3. But if you feel as though they can be an impact player as a rookie and turn into one of the better players in that draft class, then that to me is a sleeper. A sleeper is not a 2nd round pick. I don't even think a sleeper is a 3rd round pick necessarily.
I don't either.
I think it has to be 4th round and later.
Maybe even later than that. I did see footage of this one guy that if I can find it on Twitter, I want to show you. Have you heard of AJ Simon, who plays for the University of Albany?
I have not, no.
He's a defensive end. The footage on this guy was just crazy, and I saw it the other day, and now I'm having a hard time finding it. He's from Tobyhanna, PA. Do you know where that is?
I do know where Tobyhanna, PA is because I worked at a news station, my previous job prior to Chat Sports in northeastern Pennsylvania. We covered 17 counties, northeast and central Pennsylvania, covered some Penn State football. Tobyhanna is within that range, actually.
So he's a defensive end, and I mean, dude, it's unbelievable when you watch the destruction this guy brings to offensive tackles. I mean, if I can find this video, it's unfreaking believable.
267 pounds at 6'1". He's from the Poconos, which is a popular mountain range in Pennsylvania.
Okay. But you haven't heard of this guy?
No, never heard of him. I know where he's from. I know what high school he went to, and I know where the Poconos are. It's a very popular tourist destination with a lot of mountains, ski ranges, and all that stuff.
Okay, well, the measurables and what really stands out. Listen to this as measurables. You just listed 6'1", 267 pounds, 4.59 speed, 34 reps of 225.
That's crazy.
That right. If all you knew was that, you'd be like, whoa, really? That's a lot of reps. But then the footage I saw of this guy pushing offensive linemen around who are probably what, 300, 320 or whatever, was just unfreaking believable. And now I can't find it, but if I do find it, I'll put it up there. But this guy, draft sleepers. If you're playing at the University of Albany, his name is Amatral Simon, and he goes by AJ Simon, and he's just ridiculous. The way he just destroys offensive tackles. So
I need people to realize how difficult it is to bench press 225 pounds 35 times. I was in Pennsylvania last weekend visiting some family for Easter, and then I also helped my girlfriend move out of her dad's house. And some of the movers were jacked. And one guy was saying that he can bench 350 pounds. And I'm like, wow, I have a running streak more than 300 days. I've done 100 push-ups every single day since November 1st. I'll never get to a point where I'm going to bench press that much weight. That's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. But I'm doing a video on sleepers, and that's one of them. AJ Simon, University of Albany, and I don't know where he's going in the draft. These mock drafts, they don't even have him listed. One of the things I wanted to talk about was this CBS Sports story on Budda Baker, and I don't know if you saw this one, but there's talk that Budda Baker might actually be out there for trade, and that the Niners were one of the three teams. And a lot of people are saying, hey, it's agent driven, and you're gonna have to pay a big dollar total on Budda Baker. Just off the rip, what do you think of the concept? I mean, the Niners, I think, are looking for impact guys on the backside. Budda Baker is exactly that. They're probably looking for a free safety. Budda Baker is that. He's not old. He's 28. He's a great, great player. It would be an in the division trade, which they're usually pretty rare. What do you think? I mean, do you think Budda Baker to the Niners makes sense? Is it not make sense because of the cap? How do you see it?
I'm always an advocate for getting as many good football players on your team as possible. And I talked about this article and how San Francisco is listed as a potential suitor, a potential destination. That makes a lot of sense. And the foundation of this is that Budda Baker requested a trade last offseason before getting a raise. So he wanted out from Arizona, probably used that as a little bit of leverage. The Cardinals are in a spot where they're still rebuilding that roster under Jonathan Gannon, who, when I was at the NFL Combine, people were raving about him. Players and coaches really love Jonathan Gannon, but they're not ready this year. And Arizona, ideally, from their standpoint, could probably trade him away and net some decent draft capital. Now, L'Jarius Sneed and that deal between the Chiefs and the Titans got back a third and a fifth. And then, of course, that deal altered a little bit by Tennessee having to give him a contract extension. So I'm not sure what the compensation would be. But Kyle Shanahan even said this offseason, we're still in the market for a safety. There are some questions about Talanoa Hufanga coming off that torn ACL and whether or not he's a scheme fit for what Nick Sorensen wants to do. And Budda Baker is a fantastic player. He's a baller who would be a fan favorite just because of the way that he plays. He is expensive, has a base salary of $14.2 million, a cap hit of $19 million. Still younger, though, entering his age 28 season. What I really like about him is his versatility. But also on that same point, because he's so versatile and you use him all around the field, would he clash with the playing style of Talanoa Hufanga and Jair Brown, who are more of that strong safety as compared to being a free safety? Baker's last full season was in 2022, had an overall Pro Football Focus grade of 73.7. It's really good against the run, which is what the Niners have put an emphasis on this offseason at the defensive line, but across that defense and just improving against the run game. But he played all around the football field, which is why I think that he's a chess piece that I think would be just a fascinating addition to this team. He played 41 snaps along the defensive line, 349 snaps in the box, 413 snaps at free safety, 148 in the slot, and then 18 snaps at cornerback. So he does play a lot of strong safety, but he's used everywhere And those are all pluses, right? But the negative for San Francisco, you think back to that Mike Silver piece of Hufanga coming off the ACL, and because of how they utilize him and how he kind of clashes from a strong safety standpoint with Jair Brown, would things be muddied up a little bit by adding a player like Budda Baker to Brown and Hufanga in that safety spot?
He's in the last year of his deal, so the price tag via trade could be very nominal. I mean, considering he makes what he makes, the cap considerations, he's a free agent at the end of the year. It could be one of these situations where you might be able to get him for, a mid to late day 3 pick.
Yeah.
And then
that's great value.
That's great value. The question is, can you squeeze him? Can you squeeze him into your financial situation? That's yet to be determined. Okay, so I have found the film on this kid, Simon. I got to show this to you. This is unbelievable. Watch the way this guy ragdolls and steamrolls offensive tackles. Here we go. I'm going to put this up and move that back so you can actually see it. Here we go. Look at that.
Oh, just a bull rush right there.
I mean, he's just working those guys.
He's nasty.
Yeah. 267 pounds. So he's roughly 270 on a 6'1" frame. The way he's jolting these 300-pound linemen and the way their pads are going back, it's like you can see the 34 reps of 225 right there. You can see that strength.
Yeah.
It's and I think that the guy with the yellow pants, I think that's Wyoming. Maybe it's not. I'm not sure, but anyway, once again, there's a bunch of guys, and it's hard. You don't want to overvalue any of these guys, but when you see this kind of strength off the edge, especially in a simple system, the Niners are going wide 9 and there's not a lot of like, will he fit your system? It's like, can he get up the field and rush the passer? And this guy looks like he might be able to do it. Probably a day 3 pick.
Or anyway. UDFA. And the Niners have hit on some UDFAs. By the way, we're talking about AJ Simon out of Albany for people just joining the show as a draft sleeper. And Larry, you think about that size, nearly 270 pounds. Could he be one of those sleepers, day 3 UDFA, who when I watch him, I think he could line up on the inside and he could kind of fill that Arden Key, Charles Omenihu type of hybrid role where he can play edge, but he can also play defensive tackle a little bit and get that bull rush.
Yeah, it would be something to watch. All right, today's the 5th. We're 20 days away from draft night, at least day 1 of the NFL draft. It's the 25th, 26th, and 27th in Detroit. What's the primary? We've talked about this a few times, but every time that a few more guys are signed, there's more revelations about the prospects and the board and everything. Everything comes into clearer focus as we get closer to the draft. How do you feel right now, 20 days out, roughly 3 weeks, as far as the primary need for the Niners?
Overall, I feel pretty good about this football team. They were a couple of plays away from winning the Super Bowl and taking down the Kansas City Chiefs. If they didn't shoot themselves in the foot and have all of these self-inflicted wounds, we'd be talking about the Niners having a 6th Lombardi trophy. We would have been in San Francisco for another Super Bowl parade. The narrative around Kyle Shanahan would have changed dramatically, where he'll go down, if he wins a Super Bowl, as one of the most influential, creative offensive minds in the history of the game. And imagine the differences in the conversations that we'd be talking about pertaining to Brock Purdy and then some of the other older players on this roster, a Trent Williams, a Nick Bosa, a Fred Warner, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Kyle Juszczyk. Their legacies change dramatically if the Niners win a Super Bowl. But we're sitting here in early April, and the NFL draft is approaching, and this football team is still really, really good. The offense was the number 1 overall offense in the National Football League last year. Defensively, hopefully they're able to get back to that 2022, 2021, 2019 form, and hopefully Nick Sorensen's going to be able to do that. I think that the coaching there is going to be interesting with Nick Sorensen being the DC, but Brandon Staley being a part of the game planning. Is it too many cooks in the kitchen? I think Kyle Shanahan deserves a lot of credit for finding and developing really good coaches and coordinators. Look at what Mike McDaniel's been able to do. Look at what D'Amico Ryans did last year and what the Texans are doing after that Stephon Diggs trade. They're coming right for the necks of the Kansas City Chiefs. Robert Saleh, mixed results, obviously, with New York, but they haven't had a quarterback. So I like where this football team is at right now, but there are certainly a couple of areas of weakness for San Francisco. Most importantly, it's the offensive line. They brought back John Feliciano. They gave Colton McKivitz that contract extension. He gave up 45 pressures throughout the season last year at right tackle, and then 12 more in 3 playoff games. It simply is not good enough. Now, John Feliciano was the 4th highest graded guard as far as run block win rate last year, and he was 25th pass blocking. And if you have him for the entire season over Spencer Burford, that's another year of scheme familiarity. And I think that helps you improve at right guard. But I wouldn't be opposed to selecting a guard in the first round if a really good one falls, or if there's a really good guard in the second round. I think you have to find that long-term option at guard. And Spencer Burford is still a really young player. I like how he took accountability for the bad assignment on that Chris Jones play when he allowed him to run free at Brock Purdy on that critical 3rd and goal when he had Aiyuk and Jennings open and he couldn't find Aiyuk or Jennings because Chris Jones was right in his face. But I'd like to see San Francisco target a future guard. I think center could be in play. Jackson Powers Johnson intrigues me a lot out of Oregon as a first-round center. He's not going to be there in the second round when the Niners pick comes around at 63 overall. At guard, you can find a Jordan Morgan, but his injury history is a little bit concerning. 2 years ago, he tore his ACL, and throughout his collegiate career has been a little bit banged up, but he played tackle at Arizona. Shorter arms. The Niners like offensive linemen with longer arms to play tackle, but that's a player who, when I watch the tape, he's been really good. That's certainly an option. And then there are a bevy of offensive tackles. And you can find some experienced offensive tackles. You can find some raw players like Amarius Mims out of Georgia, who is a freak athlete with unbelievable size, 8 college starts to his name. Tyler Guyton, Trent Williams really likes him. Oklahoma guy, but he only has 10 college starts to his name. Graham Barton is a player who can play center, guard, and left tackle. If he falls to the Niners at 31, I think that he could be an impact player for this team for the next decade. So offensive line, I think, is the biggest area of need for San Francisco. I've said this time and time again. I think it's held them back in the biggest of games against the elite competition the last 3 years in the NFC title games and in the Super Bowl. Outside of offensive line, I would look at getting another outside corner because Diamador Lenore, Charvarius Ward, Isaac Yiadom. Yiadom signed a 1-year deal, but Ward and Lenore are in the final years of their contracts. I think defensive tackle is a really big need. Another wide receiver, another safety. What happens at linebacker with Dre Greenlaw being out? So those are all of the areas of need. In the later rounds, you could find some really solid players. What's the RB2 situation behind Christian McCaffrey? Elijah Mitchell's always hurt. I like Jordan Mason. I'm not sure the coaching staff likes Jordan Mason. So those are some of the areas that I could see San Francisco targeting here in about 3 weeks.
One stat to consider, and I heard this one yesterday, Brock Purdy was pressured on 40% of his dropbacks in the Super Bowl.
It's not good enough.
40%. That is a high number. It makes you think that offensive line probably should be the priority. I was at a dinner last night with a bunch of Niner fans and Bay Area sports fans, and a lady came up to me and she's like, I'm so big on the draft. And I was like, wow, I'm shocked. She didn't seem like a draftnik to me, but she's like, if you had to bet everything you had on who the 49ers would take, who do you think it would be? And I'm like, that's a damn good question. I go, I'm going to ask that to Chase Senior tomorrow morning. That's a good one because it's like, you kind of cuts through all positions and just kind of goes with the most likely guy. I said to her that if I kind of always believe that the Niners always come back to the D line, but there's such a need for offensive line. And when Kyle Shanahan spoke recently, he said, we signed Colt McKivitz. We love him, this and that, but we're going to continue looking or continue shopping or whatever. And it just reeked of, we got this guy signed, but now we're going to go find a big time tackle if we can. So I would probably say Tyler Guyton, and that's what I told her. I said Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, just because he played right tackle at Oklahoma. I think there's potential in 2 or 3 years to switch over to left tackle, but he could be a plug and play right tackle if they, I mean, he's a true destroyer in the run game at 6'8", 325 or whatever he is. I said Tyler Guyton. What do you think? But then I thought about it. I'm like, well, I probably should have gone with a defensive lineman of some kind. And if I was going defensive line, I might go somebody like Braden Fisk or Michael Hall. But I went with Guyton. If I asked you that question, who is, you got to bet everything you own on the Niners drafting one player at 31. Who would be the guy?
Yeah, I like Tyler Guyton, and I think that Oklahoma connection with Trent Williams might help him early in his career because Trent Williams is very familiar with the player. We know that Williams is getting a little bit older, but the opportunity to take a young player under his wing when he knows the importance of developing offensive line and in particular that position for San Francisco, I think that could make a lot of sense. Amarius Mims is a player, like I said, with all of the physical upside that you want for a tackle who could be a perennial Pro Bowler. And when you look at what he did against Ohio State in the college football playoff 2 years ago, you're like, oh my goodness. But the valid question is, on a loaded Georgia team, if we're talking about him as a first-round pick, why did he only have 8 starts throughout his college career?
Right.
And how steep is the learning curve going to be for a player like that? If you want a player who's a lot more experienced, Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU has played a lot at BYU. He's a good scheme fit, light feet, can get out in space. He's played a ton. And when you mentioned defensive tackles, Jerzon Newton could be there out of Illinois. He's a really solid player, hasn't been able to test or do anything in the pre-draft process because of injury. Braden Fisk, measurables were unbelievable at the NFL scouting combine. And at edge rusher and defensive tackle, you really have no young developmental pieces outside of Drake Jackson, who up to this point has been a bust. And I think defensive tackle, defensive end could be in play for San Francisco. Could they trade up for a player like Chop Robinson? If Latu Latu at a UCLA drops a little bit, either to 31 or he's there in the mid-20s, do the Niners try to move up for a player like that? Do they go defensive tackle? Because you addressed it with Malik Collins, who's been more productive and more available than Eric Armstead, but you have Malik Collins, 28. You have Javon Hargrave in his early 30s. You brought back Kevin Gibbons. You have Kalia Davis, but he's been injured, including his last year at UCF when he tore his ACL. Defensive tackle, defensive end, you need to replenish those roster spots a little bit. And I think those, in addition to offensive linemen, could be in play for the Niners in the first round too.
You had a beautiful pronunciation of the BYU offensive lineman's last name. I've been butchering it. I've been calling him Kingsley Suamataia.
Kingsley Suamataia.
Suamataia. Okay, there you go.
I'm 95% sure that's right. But
no,
there's a lot of offensive linemen who have very confusing names in this draft. You have Troy Fatanu, you have Talis Fuaga, you have Kingsley Suamataia, Karan Amagaji. I mean, my goodness, it's a mouthful. A lot of syllables.
Seriously. A lot of syllables. Did you get what were the combine actual measurements on the BYU kid? Because, I saw him listed at 285. I've seen him listed at 325. That's a 40-pound difference. And I'll tell you, he whatever weight he is at, he looks really comfortable at that weight. He doesn't look pumped up. He looks like his frame could add more weight. I mean, there's a lot of people that feel like this guy's a mauler in the run game and maybe could start right away at right tackle. What were his final measurements? And because to me, that when you look like you're 280 but you're really 325, that's a great sign. That means that you're kind of a natural at that weight. You don't have to lift weights to get to 325 or do all kinds of off-season work. He looks comfortable at whatever weight he was at.
Yeah, I always look at these relative athletic scores, and basically they grade these athletes on an athletic testing scale of 0 to 10. So 10 obviously being elite. So Kingsley Suamataia had an RAS score of 9.35. That's obviously really good out of 10. He's 6'4", 326 pounds. He had 31 reps of 225 on the bench press. So we were talking about AJ Simon with those 35 reps. Kingsley Suamataia had 31 reps, 34 and a quarter inch arms, which are solid. He had a 28-inch vertical, which sometimes can gauge short area quickness and explosiveness. Really good broad jump of 9 feet. He ran a 5.04 40-yard dash at 326 pounds. And I want people to put that into context, right? Because Xavier Worthy set the NFL Combine record with the 4.21 40-yard dash at like 165 pounds. So Suamataia is running a 5.04 at 326 pounds. So obviously a lot heavier than a player like Kingsley Suamataia, or a lot lighter. And Suamataia obviously heavier than a player like Xavier Worthy. But in this scheme for Kyle Shanahan, outside zone, we see Trent Williams with those pancake blocks. They make highlight reels all the time when he climbs to that second and third level, him pancaking DBs and linebackers and safeties. And it's always so fun to watch a player who's 330 pounds pancaking a 200-pounder downfield to open up some holes for some of the fellow runners, whether it be Debo, Aiyuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, others. Suamataia moves really well for his size, and he's kind of played in a zone scheme for BYU, and that's why he could be a little bit of a scheme fit. And you don't have to worry about the lack of experience if you want him to be a plug-and-play guy, which then, if he does play from the jump, that puts Colton McKivitz in a spot where I prefer him to be. I think he's a swing tackle. He can play a little bit on the interior. I just don't think he's good enough to be a starter in this league.
I'm going to give you 5 names. You tell me round 1, round 2. Okay. Kool-Aid McKinstry, the Alabama corner. Is he going in the first or is he going in the second?
I think he's going in the first. If he does fall to the second, it's because teams have concerns about the medicals. He had that Jones fracture in which he just got surgery on. I think it was last week, but still at his pro day, he ran like a 4.3, 4.4 40-yard dash. After Quinion Mitchell, I think you can make the argument he's the number 2 corner in this class.
Darius Robinson, the practice player of the week in Mobile, the Missouri defensive lineman, 6'5", 285. Is he, is he an edge? Is he a wide 9? Is he a 5 technique and a 3-4? Is he an interior guy? Is he round 1, round 2?
I think he's a fringe round 1 guy, 1 good year of college production. I think he slips into the second.
Okay. Number 3 on the list, Ladd McConkey. He was just on the NFL Network. He ran in the 4.3s. People are in love with this kid. He's only scored 2 touchdowns this year. Where is he? Round 1, round 2? Could you see McConkey being a Niner?
So I think because of the byproduct of Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy, maybe Michael Penix, and maybe Bo Nix, that could be 6 quarterbacks that go in the first round, on top of just a Dallas Turner going, offensive linemen going, and then wide receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors. I think Brian Thomas might go in the first round. A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy. That's 6 wideouts. So I think because the quarterbacks go off the board, the top defensive players, top offensive linemen, then the top wide receivers go off the board, that puts McConkey into the second round. Also, I'm not sure if a team's going to be willing to utilize a first-round pick on just a prototypical classic slot wide receiver.
Braden Fisk, Florida State. He was a transfer. Man, his footwork at the combine was incredible. I don't know that he's to me, he's not an every down guy. He's more of a rotation guy. But we're talking about 6'5", 295, and the motor is awesome. Round 1, round 2.
We were just talking about those RAS scores. He scored a 9.97, so nearly perfect. He measured in at the combine at 6'4", 292. And at that size, he ran a sub 4.8 40-yard dash. I think because of the measurables here and because of the quickness at defensive tackle and that Aaron Donald type of category, I'm not comparing him, but teams will fall in love with that quickness along the interior. I think he goes round 1.
Interesting. And the last guy on the list is Xavier Leggett. I mean, or Leggett. And the more I watch this guy, the more I see AJ Brown. I mean, he's 6'3", he's 230. He runs and, a great 40 time. He only had 1 year of big time production. But man, I mean, he did it in the SEC and he just runs away from people. You've watched a lot of Eagle Ball. Does he remind you of AJ Brown, and round 1 or round 2 for him?
Yeah, he's 220 pounds, so that size is equivalent to a Deebo Samuel, but AJ Brown is taller than Deebo Samuel. He also ran extremely fast. I think he's more of a round 2 guy. I haven't seen a lot of buzz of him going round 1, but man, if San Francisco can get him as an X who's really fast, really tall, really physical, has a wild story too. I believe both of his parents passed away, was a late bloomer at South Carolina because of some of the human nature stuff and some of the personal things that he had to overcome. I think he's going to be a really, really good player, but I think Xavier Leggett, I think a Malachi Corley, they're going to be those really good round 2 wide receivers who might be able to make an impact from day 1. That's what AJ Brown was able to do. He was a 2nd round pick out of Ole Miss.
All right. There's an interesting article on 49er Web Zone. An NFL scout recently told NFL Analyst Network that Brock Purdy has yet to reach his ceiling and hinted at a bright future for Purdy, saying, "I can't say enough that Brock Purdy has so much more potential left to unlock." The analyst stated he's already a superstar, but he's nowhere close to his ceiling. If he ends up reaching his ceiling, Hall of Fame is the least of the accolades that he has talent and ability to achieve. That is, I mean, I'm a fan of Brock Purdy, but Hall of Fame is the least. I mean, come on. That's lofty talk about Brock Purdy, but we haven't seen, Chase, Brock Purdy even have one off season. He has gone to the NFC Championship game and now the Super Bowl. He has not had that time to just get stronger, get quicker, get more confident, get more sudden. I think there's a lot more there. I don't know about what this guy's talking about, but what do you think? I mean, this almost kind of makes you think about, what is the future of Brock Purdy? Is he There were people, Chase, that told me, and you, I'm sure you got the same messages I got, that Brock Purdy couldn't improve from last year to this year, that he had maxed out, which was lunacy. But here we are. He's a 24-year-old quarterback. He's had an amazing couple first 2 years here. What is the upside potential for Brock Purdy? How good can Brock be?
I think you make an excellent point in saying this is the first time, and Kyle Shanahan talked about this at the NFL owners meetings last week, that Brock Purdy is going to have a full off season to train, to understand this offense, to work with his wide receivers, and to just continue to develop as a professional quarterback in this league. Year 1, he was the 3rd quarterback in camp behind Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance, so he didn't get a lot of snaps. And also, he was drafted, so his offseason was delayed because of that. And then last year, he literally didn't have an offseason. All it entailed was him rehabbing off the UCL injury and surgery that he had to undergo. And nobody thought that he was going to be ready for the start of training camp. Very few people thought that he was going to be ready for the start of the regular season. He was chucking the rock and slinging the pill day 1 of training camp last year. So I think that goes to show you just the dedication and the work ethic that he has. Brett Coleman is one of the OG NFL YouTubers on this platform, and he sat down for dinner a couple of weeks ago with some NFL quarterback mechanics coaches, and they said that Brock Purdy hasn't reached his ceiling yet, and they think that he can take yet another leap because they talked about his work ethic being obsessive, and he's possessed but trying to be great. And I think physically, maybe Brock Purdy is tapped out. there's not really much to build upon within that body, which is a little bit of a slight frame. But when do quarterbacks peak? Just in year 2. Quarterbacks sometimes peak 3, 4, 5 years in, and then it can be a steady progression from there and a model of consistency. And you look at what Purdy did in 2023, people haven't put this into context enough outside of some of the real ones in the Bay Area and diehard Niner fans. It's time we talk about how great Brock Purdy was in 2023. I think that people just don't give him the credit that he deserves because he's a little bit smaller and people are obsessed with these alien-like quarterbacks who have just ridiculous arm strength and great mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, Brock Purdy was number 3 in passing touchdowns last year. He was number 1 in yards per attempt at 9.5. And if you want to tell me that he has a noodle arm or the system and the play calling and his weapons make him, well, how about this? Deep ball completion rate was number 1 in the NFL at 55.3%.
Wow.
His pressured completion percentage was 63%. That's number 4 in the NFL. You want to talk about the processing, those numbers speak to that. But how about this? His red zone completion rate, when the field gets condensed and the game moves a little bit quicker and you have to make very fast decisions. Red zone completion rate, number 2 in the NFL. His true passer rating, 113.4, number 1 in the NFL. His QBR, number 1 in the NFL. EPA, a top all quarterbacks in the NFL. And how about this? His receiver target separation was 14th in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes, number 1 in the NFL. Now, his receivers dropped a lot of footballs, but Brock Purdy had to display long ball accuracy, touch and accuracy deep downfield while having the 14th best separation. Kyle Shanahan schemes everybody open, not according to the numbers. And then his deep ball catchable rate percentage was 61.7%, number 1 in the NFL. So I've been talking about this. Who's to say Brock Purdy can't get better in year 3 for his second full season as a starter in this league? I think that he can get better. Now, it's an interesting conversation to have when he gets paid $40 to $50 million inevitably, if he has a 2024 like he had in 2023, and the Niners can't support him with as many weapons around him, are those numbers going to be the same? It's going to be difficult to do that, but can more experience maybe make up for that? I think the sky's the limit for Purdy. I think the only thing that could hold him back is him staying healthy because he does have a slighter frame. But him matched up with Kyle Shanahan, I think it could be a recipe for San Francisco to have a lot of success at that position and as a team.
John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan call you into a meeting and they say, Chase, you've watched the Niners, you study the Niners. We want Brock to have a big, big year this year. What do we need to add to have him have a big year? Is it another running back that helps give them depth? Is it another dynamic receiver? Is it a speed-based receiver that creates space? Is it an offensive lineman that somehow could step in at right guard or right tackle, maybe even center? Is it a second tight end that's really intriguing we know how much he loves to throw to the tight end. What piece of the puzzle makes Brock more dynamic this year? I mean, you can draft a great offensive lineman, but if he's going to sit behind McKivitz this year, he's not going to make Purdy better this year. So what piece of the puzzle would you advise them to add to try to get Purdy that ring this year?
Yeah, I got to sit down with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and say there were 11 pressures on Brock Purdy in the Super Bowl. 9 of them were unblocked. So, Kyle Shanahan, I need you to do a better job with your protection schemes, and I need you to make some alterations in the pass game with how your offense pass blocks. And if you do that, Brock Purdy won't be running for his life like he was in the Super Bowl against Kansas City because Steve Spagnuolo got really creative with how to generate some of those pass rushes. So, I'm asking Kyle Shanahan to take a long, deep, hard look at that. And then you just have to get better along the offensive line. You can upgrade at center from Jake Brendel. You can get better at right guard from Spencer Burford and John Feliciano, although Feliciano is a very affordable option on a team that's a little bit cash-strapped. And you need to get better at right tackle because I just listed all of the numbers that Purdy was able to accomplish coming off elbow surgery. And now we're looking at a quarterback who is 17-4 as a starter. He's pretty much 4-1 in the NFL playoffs. If you take away the Eagles NFC Championship game, from year one to year two, his completion rate went up from 67.1% to 69.4%. His touchdown to interception ratio was 31-11 this past year, and his yards per attempt went up from 8.1 to 9.6. So he can improve, and he will naturally, you would think, with more experience and just becoming more acclimated with what the NFL game is. But you need to do him help. You've done a great job in drafting and developing these weapons. George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk. You got aggressive in trading for Christian McCaffrey, who was the MVP of this team this past year. And I thought that he should have gotten more MVP consideration as far as the NFL MVP conversation goes last year over Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott. You give him an offensive line and you improve this defense a little bit. The only thing that can hold the Niners back from winning a Super Bowl is themselves. And I said this all last year. The only way that the Niners don't win a Super Bowl or make it to the Super Bowl is if they hold themselves back. And what did they do in the Super Bowl? They held themselves back.
We got one comment here from Whale and Wasp, and I love the moniker. He says Zack Frazier, just a simple name, Zack Frazier.
West Virginia.
To me, when you draft a guy in the first round, you gotta love him from almost every standpoint.
Yeah.
This to me is one of the great prospects in this draft. This guy's 6'3". He's 310 pounds. He was a 2-time All-American. He was a 3-time All-Conference player. He was the 3-time team captain. The big award in Mountaineer land is Iron Mountaineer. He was a 2-time winner of the Iron Mountaineer the last couple of years. 3-time academic All Big 12 first team. The guy's played 47 career games, 46 starts, 37 straight at center. And then when you dig a little deeper, you see he's an academic, player. He's a tough guy. But what I love, he's a 4-time heavyweight wrestling state champion in high school. Only lost 2 wrestling matches his entire career. Had the highest winning percentage of any high school wrestler in the history of Marion County, West Virginia. He's already married to his high school sweetheart. His father played football at Fairmont State. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in sports management in December with a 4.0 GPA. Big 12 commissioner's honor roll. This guy's smart. He's tough. If you watch his film, he's dominating. I kind of think Brendel is kind of the weakness on that offensive line. I got no problem with the Niners at 31 pulling the trigger on this kid, Zack Frazier. I think this is one of the great dominant players in the draft. I know Jackson Powers has gotten a lot of love, and I like him, and he may be a little bit more athletic than this kid. But this kid's toughness, smarts, and leverage ability are dominant. I think this is a plug-and-play, tone-setting, 10-year starter, difference maker. I'd go with this kid, and start the rebuild right there at the pivot and try to hold the Chris Joneses and the dominant interior players out of Brock Purdy's face with this guy. What can you tell me? What do you think of Zack Frazier? Have you heard anything? I know you do your own deep dives on these guys and have a pretty good opinion. What do you think of Frazier? What are you hearing?
Man, he started 46 of 47 games at West Virginia. He's a really fluid mover. I always absolutely love offensive linemen who have a wrestling background. And my first job out of college, I worked in Springfield, Illinois, and wrestling in the Midwest.
The land of Lincoln.
Exactly. Abraham Lincoln's hometown growing up. And wrestling is huge in that area of the country. And a lot of those wrestlers are also offensive linemen. And the tape that we would go back and watch with coaches, the highlights that we would see on the cameras in which we shot the games with, those offensive linemen have no fear. They are so nasty. They will grapple. They will pancake you. They'll laugh in your face, and they'll keep it moving. So I always love offensive linemen with that type of background. This kid is experienced. You talk about offensive linemen and centers getting out in space on some of those pull blocks. He can accomplish that. And when you have a player like Jake Brendel and he's making $5 million per year, that's about what a rookie salary would be for an offensive lineman when you draft him at that point in the draft. You can certainly upgrade there. And when Javon Hargrave in the NFC Championship game 2 years ago was bursting right through your line and manhandling the interior of that Niners offensive line, when Chris Jones is doing it once again in the Super Bowl this past year in February, at what point is that a trend? It's a little bit of a trend that the offensive line, interior, right guard, right tackle, simply is not where it needs to be for this team to accomplish their goal of winning a Super Bowl. You need to get better there. West Virginia, take me home. Zack Frazier, take me to the promised land and complete that quest for 6.
All right. Last one for you. And we appreciate you. I love these Friday streams with you. They're always some of the best of the week. The Aiyuk talk. I mean, I understand the Niner fan, right? Niner fans like, hey, man, this guy's 26. We drafted this guy. We're in our Super Bowl window. This is Brock's number one weapon. We can't move this guy. But then you look at, you're going to pay Brock 45 to 50 times what he's making. And this debate of, well, do you move Aiyuk? Do you move Debo? It might be a situation you might have to move both over the next 2 years to pay Brock what he's making and, to accommodate the rest of this roster. There were a Bleacher Report article, a bunch of different sample trades. And I've gone over a bunch of them. I don't really like any of them, to be honest, because I want to keep Aiyuk. And I've heard people make the argument, oh, you can easily keep Aiyuk. Okay. But then it gets really, really cost prohibitive in 2 years and 3 years down the road. And the one trade that was intriguing, and I as a PA guy, I got to ask you about this one. It was Aiyuk to the Commanders for their second round pick, which is like 35 or something like that. Their third round pick, I think they've got 5 picks inside the top 50. So they could afford to move a second and a third in this year's draft. So no deferred compensation to 2025. You get a 2, you get a 3, and you get Jahan Dotson.
Mm-hmm.
And Dotson, I really loved coming out of Penn State. Now, granted, he's small, but he's got terrific ball skills. If you throw it in his area, he does catch the ball. He plucks it with his hands. He's not physically dominant like Aiyuk. He probably isn't as fast. But, man, if you said with Brock Purdy in this offense as opposed to Aiyuk with Drake May or Jaden Daniels in Washington's offense behind Scary Terry, I think there's a chance that Dotson could put up some big numbers in year 3 here if he's healthy. You watched him at Penn State, so I'll defer to you.
Yeah.
What do you think of that trade of Aiyuk for a high 2, a high 3, and Jahan Dotson? Is that a fair trade? Is that too little, too much? How do you see it?
Yeah, I'm actually going live in a couple of hours on the 49ers Report, and I have that as a segment just reacting to all of those trade ideas. I like Dotson as a player, and coming out of Penn State, and I'll always say this about Penn State, James Franklin is such a bad coach when it comes to going up against elite competition, but their strength and conditioning program, his ability to find recruits, develop them into pros, as good as any program in the country, honestly. And Dotson is just an excellent football player. He can track the football, has really good, reliable hands. He's a smooth route runner. His numbers the first 2 years with subpar quarterback play have been solid. I think they could be much better in the San Francisco offense. I really liked them coming out of Penn State in that draft class a couple of years ago. My only issue, I'll take Dotson, but if you took Brandon Aiyuk 25th in 2020, you already used a first-round pick on him. He is now a second-team All-Pro. Stephon Diggs got a second, and you might look at Diggs' entire resume and say, he's so much better than Aiyuk. He's a declining older player. Brandon Aiyuk is a young and ascending player who every year that he's been in the league, he's gotten better. So I think the starting point for trade compensation for Aiyuk has to be a first-round pick. That's what the Eagles had to do for A.J. Brown, and Brandon Aiyuk isn't the player that A.J. Brown is, but he's pretty damn close. The trade that I liked in that article was the trade with Pittsburgh, where the Steelers get Aiyuk and a round 4 pick this year, and the Niners get 20th overall and a third-round pick, and that's 98 overall. And in doing so, you get equal compensation to where you took Aiyuk in the first round, you hold on to 31. So you could go wide receiver, offensive lineman, wide receiver to find that Aiyuk replacement. And if any team wants to trade for Aiyuk, I'm demanding that they send me a first-round pick, whether it's the Jags, whether it's the Steelers, the Commanders. Their pick is way too high to surrender that first-round pick. So that's why they'd be sending the 36 overall pick. And even if you're at 31 and 36, you can get two really good players there. You could still go offensive line, and then you could go Xavier Legette, you could go Malachi Corley, you could go Ladd McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, but I just want a first-round pick because I feel as though that's equal value for a really special player in Aiyuk.
And you don't think the 2, the 3, and the Dotson would equate to a first-round pick? Because you're almost there in the first. You're like 3 or 4 picks into the second.
Yeah, I see what Washington would be trying to do there, and the combination of picks theoretically makes up for the non-first rounder, but I just want that first round pick. I really want that first round pick to be sitting somewhere in the 20s and at 31, and then I get that Aiyuk replacement, and I get an offensive lineman who can be a plug-and-play guy. That's 2 starters right there who I'm really, really sure about if I do my due diligence in the scouting process for San Francisco.
They say that Adam Peters was the guy who banged the table the loudest for Ambry Thomas. What if you could move Ambry Thomas in that deal and pick up Emmanuel Forbes coming back?
Oh, I like Emmanuel Forbes. He's got really good length.
He's skinny as heck, man. But he's a productive interceptor, and he's what the Niners really need. They need a more of a number 1 type corner. They don't need corner depth. They have corner depth. They need a starter. And Forbes is thin, but he's a starter. There's no doubt.
And he's long and rangy. I will say he talked a lot of shit going into that Eagles game last year at Lincoln Financial Field, and A.J. Brown made him his son. He just dominated him throughout that game. So, that affected his confidence a little bit, and the Commanders actually took him out of the starting lineup, if I'm not mistaken. But if you're talking about traits, speed, ball skills, long and rangy, that's one of the players there, and Adam Peters wasn't there when the Commanders drafted him, so he's not really emotionally tied to him.
All right, man, we're leaving. We're walking out the door, but Brandon Grammer says, "What's going on with the Tyler Boyd talks?" What did you make of that? That story got played like the Niners had past tense interest in Boyd. Do you think that's accurate, or do you think they have interest in Boyd? And does Boyd make sense? To me, I thought he looked great in the game against the Niners at Levi's last year.
Yeah, he had a touchdown, and he's been a really productive and available and durable player since being a second-round pick out of Pitt for Cincinnati as a team captain. I read that as past tense as well, not current tense, that the Niners had interest, not that they have interest. I think what it was if another team tried to sign Jauan Jennings to an offer sheet and they gave him a really big contract, or at least bigger than the $4.89 that he's making this year for San Francisco, and they were willing to give up that second-round pick because the Niners put the second-round tag on him. If the Niners were to lose Jauan Jennings, could that have been their backup plan for Tyler Boyd, for him to be their number 3 wide receiver? I love Jauan Jennings. Tyler Boyd is a better wide receiver than Jauan Jennings, but I think Jennings is the best fit on this team alongside Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel, with the way that he plays, willingness in the blocking game, him being clutch on the money down. So I'm cool with where the Niners are at in keeping Jennings over Tyler Boyd.
Always great to wrap with you, man. Have a great Friday, a terrific weekend. We'll see you next week. Appreciate you.
Always a blast. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, and see you next week.
Thanks to the sponsors. Thanks to all of you in the audience, and peace.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you gon' get